If you guys are looking for groundbreaking content strategies for Father's Day, it's your lucky day. Copy is so fundamental to a lot of successful Father's Day campaigns and also really fundamental to your success putting your brand out there on socials. And there's a lot of really bad copy these days. And so I am going to get a little bit into the weeds today, talking about how to more effectively start your copywriting process from a really humanized state. Good copy comes from spending a lot of time on it. If something moves you, chances are it will touch someone else too. I love working with Pilot House because while we are a performance marketing agency, we really pride ourselves on caring so much about brand and creative. At Pilot House, we don't just make ads, we craft them. Every edit, every word, every scroll-stopping detail is built with purpose and care, and I truly believe that care drives creativity and creativity drives results. Our attention to both scale and brand allows us to craft strategies that deliver you short-term results while making you long-term successful, which is so important for any DTC brand. If you are curious about learning more about working with Pilot House, you can fill out a lead form at pilothouse.co and let them know you want to go on a brand new ad venture. You don't actually have to say that. You don't have to make a pun. I'm not going to force you to make a pun. Just fill out the lead form. We'd love to chat with you. Hi, welcome to Ad-venturous, a podcast hosted by me, Aves, and produced by DTC. If you guys are looking for groundbreaking content strategies for Father's Day, it's your lucky day because I've got a shovel. You get it? Groundbreaking, shovel. It's a dad joke. It's meta. It's funny. Are we all there? Anyway, Father's Day is actually very close. It's right around the corner. So if you haven't started prepping now, this is the time, divas, okay? Father's Day is a great moment for gifting, obviously, but it's also a really perfect opportunity to do some brand building, no matter sort of what your product is. It's a really fun time of year for different campaigns and content on socials. So I really wanted to dive into some very specific advice today around copy. Dads are tough, and Father's Day can be tough. Like, dads are either harnessing the full power of the Sith and concealing your true lineage from you, or they're just very difficult to buy for, or maybe both. I thought I'd share like a personal anecdote. Once for Father's Day, I got my dad a striped golf shirt, and when I gave it to him at brunch, he was wearing a nearly identical shirt from a different brand, and he loved it. I have a picture of him like holding it up. He thought it was so funny because he's just a sweet, nice guy. But I feel like that really perfectly encapsulates the Father's Day gifting experience felt by many. They're just like tougher to buy for typically than moms. So today I wanted to highlight a old print ad for a whiskey brand called Chivas Regal. They're like I think like a mid-tier Scottish whiskey. I don't drink, and if I did drink, it wouldn't be whiskey, so I don't know. They might be a really wonderful brand. No clue. But I did want to highlight this ad in particular because of the copy specifically. This print ad was like a double pager, and half of it is a really simple static shot of the product with like a gift tag, and then the other half is totally covered in copy. And it's like a really insane amount of text for any standards, especially print. But the really cool thing about this copy is that it was written by David Abbott, who is one of the most famous copywriters in advertising history. And also, I feel like kind of a personal hero of mine. So I really wanted to dive into the ad itself, as well as just copy in general and what we can learn about being better copywriters. I am, for the record, like a copywriter first advertiser. I got my start writing, not necessarily ad copy, but writing communication materials. And that is like my true love in life. So that's probably, if you're a big book nerd and reading and words, language nerd, you'll enjoy this episode. And if writing copy is something that is really daunting to you in your life as an advertiser, I think you'll also hopefully walk away with a lot of stuff to try, and also a lot of like trust in yourself and the process, because writing copy is something that I believe anyone can do. But before I get into things, we're going to post the ad in the description of the episode today, but I did want to just read it to you guys. Like I said, it's a lot of copy, so this is going to take a little while, but I think to really appreciate what this ad is without necessarily seeing it, I think you really have to like understand how much copy I'm talking about when I say there's a lot of copy. And I also think that just reading this copy is going to, again, really give you guys a look into the talent of Mr. Abbott, and also the almost precision, I guess is the best way to describe it, with which he wrote. So yeah, I'm just gonna get into it and read this ad. Like I said, it's really long, but it's really beautiful as well. So again, keep in mind, this ad is a static shot of the product. It's like a bottle of whiskey, and then beside it is all of this copy written out word for word as I'm about to read it. Because I've known you all my life. Because a red Raj bicycle once made me the happiest boy on the street. Because you let me play cricket on the lawn. Because you used to dance in the kitchen with a tea towel round your waist. Because your checkbook was always busy on my behalf. Because our house was always full of books and laughter. Because of countless Saturday mornings you gave up to watch a small boy play rugby. Because you never expected too much of me or let me get away with too little. Because of all the nights you sat working at your desk while I lay sleeping in my bed. Because you never embarrassed me by talking about the birds and the bees. Because I know there's a faded newspaper clipping in your wallet about my scholarship. Because you always made me polish the heels of my shoes as brightly as the toes. Because you've remembered my birthday 38 times out of 38. Because you still hug me when we meet. Because you still buy my mother flowers. Because you've more than your fair share of gray hairs, and I know who helped put them there. Because you're a marvelous grandfather, because you made my wife feel one of the family, because you wanted to go to McDonald's the last time I bought you lunch, because you've always been there when I've needed you, because you let me make my own mistakes and never once said I told you so, because you pretend you only need glasses for reading, because I don't say thank you as often as I should, because it's Father's Day, because if you don't deserve Chivas Regal, who does? So obviously that was, like I said, a ton of copy, but it's also genuinely so moving. Like every time I read that, and I've seen this ad many times, I come back to it for inspiration. Every single time I read that list, it moves me emotionally. It makes me think of my own dad. And some of it is so specific and visceral as well, which I love. I think it is so artistic and beautiful. And the fact that, obviously this 38-year-old British guy, we'll get into his history, that his love for his dad comes through to me and reminds me of the kind of overlaps and things that I love about my own dad, the slight tweaks. I wasn't necessarily playing cricket in the yard, but we did play some badminton. So it's like being able to be so descriptive and so specific in your copy. I feel like this is a great example of how that might not exactly translate to me and my life experiences, but it does ring true in a very authentic way. And that's kind of the theme of the episode today. Before we really get into the ad and some advice from Mr. Abbott, I thought I would go over some of his personal history and how he came into advertising, because I think it proves my hypothesis that we are all capable of writing copy that is good. Not as great as the copy I just read to you, because that is like next level shit. But again, so moving, so artistic. And so I think his background is really interesting. And again, just proves my own hypotheses, which I like. But I wanted to talk about one of my personal favorite interviews of Mr. Abbott. It's a single shot of him in a local bookstore, and he is surrounded by books, which is my happiness dream space. And he's reading words that he's written about the bookstore that he's actually in. And it's all about preserving local bookstores and sort of fighting for those smaller institutions that are so important to people who love books. Like, as someone who can't remember life before I had a stack of books on the nightstand, his speech feels like coming into a very warm house from like a rainy walk. It feels like when you're sitting at a table at a restaurant with friends until closing time. And it's so like exciting to experience, but it's also so comforting and it's so tranquil and familiar. That is exactly what his words in this interview kind of give to me, as again someone who reads a book every like 2 days. But he uses words in this speech like heroic and monument, like he's describing local bookstores as monuments, and it paints a picture and sets the stage for an epic in a lot of ways, sort of another David and Goliath that is unfolding before us all. What's really interesting is that he recorded that interview at the sort of start of this movement of book sales moving online through retailers like Amazon. So things were starting to be dominated by these big box retailers or online retailers. And he is kind of just making a case for why local bookstores are so important. And again, this was years ago. But it does remind me, I remember once I was with a mentor of mine and they were buying me like a stack of books for my birthday. And they told me that one of the most unambiguously political actions you can take in life is to be someone who frequents a local bookstore or a library. And I didn't know what that meant at the time because I was just young and loved to read, but I really understand it now, where these spaces are such cornerstones of culture and also communication that it's so important to keep them alive. This is not, by the way, like an ad for local bookstores. I have no stocks in local bookstores other than enjoying them. So that's just a little tangent for you. But yeah, what is interesting to me is that the interview did take place so many years ago, and it's only gotten more and more easy for us to dismiss local bookstores and libraries in our lives. So I do think it's so true that to make that choice today to venture into a local bookstore or library, buy something, talk to the staff, have them see you and feel like you can be seen by them, and you'll get book recommendations based on your interests and authors that you love. It's a signal for me, someone who truly loves literature and communication, which I think, again, is the crux of what we do as marketers. So I don't own a local bookstore, but if you are stuck with your copywriting, heading into a local bookstore is always like my first move. But back to Mr. Abbott, I did want to focus on him today because number one, I thought that my dad would find his life and his work very interesting. And this is a Father's Day episode. So shout out to Scott if you finally figured out how to listen to the podcast on your Android phone. Hopefully you heard this. If not, I'll tell you about it at a coffee hang. But I also really wanted to focus on Mr. Abbott and his life today because copy is so fundamental to a lot of successful Father's Day campaigns and also really fundamental to your success putting your brand out there on socials. And there's a lot of really bad copy these days. I'll say it, I don't really mind delivering that critique. There's a lot of dependencies on AI to create copy from scratch. And so I am going to get a little bit into the weeds today, talking about how to more effectively start your copywriting process from a really humanized state, and then allowing AI to help us sort of fill the gaps and be more of an assistant in these cases. Because to be a writer is not an easy feat, but it is, in my opinion, a very non-exclusive club. Any single person can learn to write ad copy well, in my opinion. Whether this is copy that's going in your creative as just ad copy, whether it's website copy, emails, it matters so much. And it is a consistent piece of the puzzle when we are building what our brand is for our audience. And I think it's so hugely overlooked these days. So again, I'm a big book nerd. You're going to hear me like continuously say that it's important, but it is. And again, Mr. Abbott's life and legacy, I think, really prove that it is within all of us to write good copy. He was born in England, and then he went to school through a scholarship to read history, but unfortunately had to leave before graduating to take care of his father, who was ill at the time. But his true start in copywriting was in-house at Kodak, and he got the job and became interested in the work after finding a book at a market stall in New York City. I wish so bad that I was the age that I am now in like the 60s or 70s. I love Joni Mitchell, and also I love the idea of finding a career because I just stumbled upon a book at a market. It's so cool. It's so fun. But I think, again, it illustrates the point that he didn't set out to be like an extraordinary copywriter. It was something he literally picked up and started doing, which is so cool. He spent, when he was in New York, time with multiple agencies after moving on from Kodak, including Doyle, Dane, and Bernbach, where he was actually directly mentored by Bill Bernbach, who will eventually get his own episode of the pod because he's really interesting and cool to look at his breadth of work as well. So after spending some time there and getting mentored by the best of the best, in the early 70s, he moved back to England where he actually opened his own advertising agency called French Gold Abbott. And just a quick aside, I honestly miss when agencies would just call themselves the names of the founders. I feel like today it's always like the Disruptors or like Cocoon the Butterfly Creative. They're always like the craziest names. And I know that's a little ironic coming from someone who bleeds for Pilot House, an advertising agency with a kooky little name. But I do miss the good old days when we're just throwing names out there. It's so standard, no vibe, just copy and paste. I feel like the boys were maybe saving the branding for like the work. I don't know what was going on, but we should return to the like 5 last name agency names. I think it's very retro. It's very chic. French Gold Abbott worked with huge clients like Volvo, Sainsbury's, IKEA, and a ton more. Obviously, Chivas Regal as well. But yeah, they had a really long laundry list of clients that they worked with and really dominated sort of in that space in the like 70s, 80s, 90s. They did a lot of work that won awards. They did a lot of very iconic work and a lot of work with a lot of intention behind it. That's something that I really love, and you can feel through all of the work that the agency did and all of the work that Mr. Abbott himself was directly tied to. As a copywriter and advertiser, he really didn't like bend the knee to the ways of the like Don Drapers of the time. I haven't watched Mad Men. Maybe I'll watch all of Mad Men and do a podcast about that. But I just feel like he didn't have that icky vibe to him. He brought something so sentimental and authentic to advertising, which is why he was as good as he was. One of my favorite quotes is that he once said, "Good copy comes from spending a lot of time on it." And statements like this, I think, really freak my colleagues and clients out that I lean on them like a crutch so often because, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, the amount of content that we have to produce today as advertisers would be inconceivable. We have to make so much that I think people get really scared when you say something like good copy comes from spending a lot of time on it. But it's like a upfront time, and that's what I always try to kind of instill in people. It's an upfront time to really pay attention to details and to celebrate the sort of labor that goes into the good work of figuring out who your customer base is. I think sometimes it's getting a little bit lost and feels a little bit spooky. So again, a really great lesson that I think we can all kind of remember looking at an advertiser like Mr. Abbott. So I believe it was actually the same year I was born that Mr. Abbott retired from advertising and focused full-time on writing, and he actually did write books as well. So I love the evolution of Mr. Abbott compared to last week when I was talking about Dolly, who took a dip into advertising like in the middle of his fame. I do appreciate sort of working as a copywriter in the world of advertising and then sort of closing that chapter, pun intended, dad joke, oh my goodness, but closing that chapter and starting to focus on more fully formed pieces of writing is really interesting to me. And the order that he did it in, I find very intriguing. But yeah, he's another like insane example of someone who lived and breathed for his craft, for writing, and still chose to spend a really large amount of his working life in advertising, which I think again says something about how fun advertising is as an art form, that, you've got people like the David Abbott, the Dolly, spending time working in advertising because they enjoy it and they find it interesting. I wanted to, because I was trying to make this as applicable for e-commerce marketing as possible. So I wanted to go over a list of 5 tips about copywriting from Mr. Abbott and kind of translate them for today's use cases, because like I said, even 5 years ago, the way that we market today would be inconceivable to us. So I really wanted to, again, take these direct quotes and these direct tips from him, but kind of modernize them for how we all have to work today. Okay, so the first tip from Mr. Abbott would be to put yourself into your work, use your life to animate your copy. If something moves you, chances are it will touch someone else too. One of my first major successes on the copywriting side when I moved from politics to the private sector and just like selling stuff for fun was when working with a client who sold specialized luxury coffee gear. I remember distinctly just sort of none of us were getting the performance that we really wanted. We really wanted to see some growth. And so I took it upon myself. I walked to a very upscale coffee shop in the city I was living in at the time and grabbed a drink. And I sat there with my eyes and ears open for like an entire afternoon. I did get multiple drinks. I wasn't being like taking up a seat and spending no money. Just for all the baristas out there, I did come in peace. But what I really wanted was to hear how the baristas described the coffee to their customers. And I also just wanted to, this sounds so creepy, but I really wanted to just watch people drinking coffee and take the time to do that. I wanted to watch the way that people came into the coffee shop. Were they like going to crack a laptop and do some work? Were they meeting up with someone? What was the like conversation like that they were holding? I wanted to see how their like physicality changed when they took a sip of coffee. I had a very specific mission, which really helped, and a really great like playground in that upscale coffee shop. I think that's a really fun example of like physically putting yourself into the work. I am someone who loves coffee, but not as much as was required of me to really nail that piece of writing. And I remember going home so inspired and staying up till like 1, 2 in the morning, pouring into the notes I had taken and then extrapolating them and regurgitating them into what would become a full like landing page for this client. And I remember something also that really sticks out to me about this kind of success story and win is that I built the physical page as I was writing the copy, which is something that we don't all always have the privilege of doing, I know. I also know last week I was talking a lot about mobile experiences and making sure that we are really paying attention to those. By writing my copy and building the wireframe for the landing page at the same time, I was able to feel like I could build a well-rounded experience on that page that was essentially mimicking what had transpired in the coffee shop that day, which was so cool and fun to be able to execute. But I remember I had like both monitors going. I had images that I was sort of tying into the copy that I was writing. And like I said, I wanted the experience, especially on mobile, please let us not forget about mobile website experiences, but I wanted the experience on the website to feel exactly how it felt walking into that upscale coffee shop. And I remember the copy itself was so focused on connection because that's really what I saw when I was creepy and watching people. I saw a real like tie with people, coffee, and connecting with one another. And it really just, again, had this huge impact on how the copy turned out. And it allowed us to start selling this very high AOV product with a single touch point, which is always very fun and very cool to actually be able to do. And it worked for years. That same page with that same copy, no matter how many times I tried to iterate on it and improve it, that original moment of inspiration from watching real people interact with what would be the end product was so important, and created such a meaningful piece of copy that I think people really just sort of stuck with. So yeah, that's a way to sort of translate that into common times. I think it's a way to think about like what you can actually do to put yourself into the work and like give a little bit of yourself and a little bit of the human behavior that you can hopefully find and see out there and really infuse it into your copy. The next tip is to think visually. Ask someone to describe a spiral staircase and they'll use their hands as well as words. Sometimes the best copy is no copy. So that is the direct tip from Mr. Abbott. And I do agree, like if you ask someone what a spiral staircase looks like, it's really easy to like, if you're listening to the podcast, not watching it, I'm like making a circle with my finger. That's obviously what you're going to do. And so this one is really interesting. And I think it's one of the most relevant points in his list for marketers today. We actually have so little time to capture attention, and attention is getting increasingly scarce on the internet. So I think this tip for me immediately harkens to Reels and story-specific short-form video ads. So I've seen the ads that have worked in that placement. The ones that rise to a certain level of virality and drive a ton of performance, they tend to keep it very minimal on the copy side, because the experience of scrolling through Reels and stories is, first of all, a millennial experience. I'll have a little millennial dig on the podcast. But also it's like a truly visual experience. Getting serious, it is actually very visual to swipe through short form videos like that. The same applies obviously if you're running content on a platform like TikTok, or if you're running ads on AppLovin. That kind of short form video content is so inherently visual that even adding a lot of copy in the form of captions for a voiceover is not always the move, because it's not necessarily what people are looking to engage with at that time. If you think about something like YouTube Shorts, people might be a little bit more willing to watch a longer form video. By longer form, I do mean like 15 seconds plus. But when we're scrolling through stories and reels, like we truly want to just see a cool thing that's represented visually. And so I think something that I always advise brands and other marketers to do is to think about how you can most uniquely show off USPs and features of the product in a visual manner. It's a really interesting like question to ask yourself, and really interesting challenge, where it's like, if I actually can't speak, I'm a mime. If I'm a mime, a funny mime, how am I going to visually show off this product? I've seen a lot of people do different things, but you want to basically just show the value and not have to say it, is the long short of this. I do love that this tip in particular is about cutting down on copy and keeping it minimal, and I am yapping quite a bit, but it's a great lesson. And sometimes the visual is going to do a lot of work, and that is especially true these days when it comes to those specific placements and platforms where people are expecting to see content that is short, snappy, and entertaining. The third tip is that if you believe that facts persuade, as I do, you'd better learn how to write a list so that it doesn't read like a list. This is such a fun piece of advice and tip, because this was like a tip of like top 5 copywriting tips from David Abbott. So it's very funny that he snuck this in there as like a little cheeky, you're reading a list, but it doesn't feel like it because I'm a genius. And I think that this is also a really important piece of advice for marketers today to think about, because as I say all the time, from the point of view of someone who has to make ads, there are a lot of ads in our everyday lives now compared to ever before. So what that also means is that people are just really used to seeing ads, and they're really used to, at this point, seeing very specific types of ads, which is like a couple of different static styles, some creator videos that all look the same. Like, people are so zeroed in on the fact that those are ads that sometimes you have to break out of that zone, and really think about how you can present a sales pitch in a way that doesn't feel like a sales pitch anymore. So one of the like most common piece of advice that you've probably heard me say on All Killer No Filler is to get weird, and that's specifically for this point. Getting weird and having like personality in that sales pitch is going to be so important to the success of your brand. Your features can't feel like a list of features. Like, nobody wants you to like be selling an iPhone and say it makes calls and it has apps and it goes on the internet. Like, listing those things, it does work on PDPs, and sometimes that type of content is great to a warmed up audience, but your value prop actually needs to be so entertaining these days, which presents a problem. I know, I'm here with you trying to make a sales pitch not sound like a sales pitch and make an ad not look like an ad, but you just have to, again, I hate to say it, get weird, think a little bit outside of the box, and really understand how you can sort of Trojan horse your way into brand affinity in a way. The last point is that confession is good for the soul and for copy too. Bill Bernbach used to say, a small admission gains a large acceptance. So that was the tip from Mr. Abbott. And like, we're all on this weird floaty rock in space, man. Like, what really moves people is honestly shared human experiences, because without them, we have nothing else but freezing cold outer space and dead stars and planets that we can't be on. So I think those shared human experiences need to be genuine. A really common mistake I see brands make is that they start from their product and not their person. So what makes this thing so good? What can it do? How exciting is this product? That tends to be how we approach brand positioning when we're either launching a brand or revisiting what the actual brand is. But taking a step back, and I think this is a great lesson to learn from Mr. Abbott, is that you need to think about that very human person on the other side of all of these conversations. And a really particular point for these times, I think, is that we, the brand, have less power than we maybe ever have before, because people, real, beautiful, weird, wacky people, find connection with one another every day in ways that we couldn't have imagined 10 years ago, let alone in the early 70s when some of this work and advice was being formulated. So everything is so different as a brand. We can't just tell people what's going on, because nowadays, if you try to create a brand with a sketchy product, people are immediately going to review it. They're immediately going to post about it. So you need to be so conscious that you're actually being genuine and authentic in your work as you build that brand. But I think it's today, building a strong brand really is all about not strong arming your own agenda, but providing actual value through a consistent stream of entertaining content that fosters really authentic connection and genuine interest in your product, and also introduces your product in a way that's going to bring genuine value into someone's actual real life. I think that to sort of ignore that shift in our cultural landscape of, it's much harder to just strong arm your ideals as a brand, and you need to be more receptive to people. I think that it does your work as a marketer a real disservice if we just kind of let that fall to the wayside. So yeah, definitely think about how you can bring value, not just from a product point of view, but from an actual connection entertainment point of view, because that's the kind of stuff that's going to drive brand affinity through the roof. I also think the sort of like elephant in the room when we talk about great advertisers who came before us and what we're doing today, I think the biggest elephant in the room is typically AI. And I think ignoring AI in an episode where we're talking about copy and going through tips on how to better write copy would be doing you guys kind of a disservice. And obviously didn't know Mr. Abbott personally, but I can guess he would have loathed a lot of the usage of AI in marketing today. And I won't say that he's entirely wrong there. I think we're in this moment where we're all kind of kids in candy stores that will eventually pass, and we will return to some like critical thought and genuine creativity within our marketing. But to completely dismiss AI, I think, is doing yourself a really big disservice. At Pilot House, we have been making really big, exciting strides in the way that we leverage AI in all of our workflows. But we're always governed by this idea that we need that human stank. And I feel like that's an actual phrase that we use. We need to continuously put that human stank on it, because whether it's my little baby examples or the examples that we're going through today, this Chivas Regal ad, Mr. Abbott's entire body of work, you need that human stank to be successful in communicating with human beings. It is not rocket scientist. It's very easy to understand. So yeah, I'd like to just reiterate, good copywriting and good advertising, it lives within your ability to connect human to human, but that doesn't mean that you should limit yourself and kind of skirt away from using tools like AI that are at your disposal, because like I said, we need to ship more ads now than ever before. If you went back in time and I looked at Mr. Abbott and I said, this is the amount of content I have to make on the amount of platforms that it stretches, it'd probably really freak him out. And he would say, yeah, maybe use a little bit of AI to help with that. But yeah, I think that number one is just to remember to start in a place of human connection and person forward thinking. And then you can start to use AI to fine tune or help create iterations. Like I said, we have so many platforms to contend with as well. So starting to think about different ad copy placements, best practices for different platforms, using it to take some of the more monotonous labor is probably my biggest tip. Another fun example is that, like, when I used to work in politics, I would insist on, if I was working with someone, going door knocking with them so that I could see physically how they connected with another human being before I started doing any work, and like writing speeches for this person that I didn't really know. This is basically the same story as the luxury coffee brand that I mentioned earlier. I would really look out for the things that made candidates like perk up physically. The issues that they truly cared about would show on their face when they talked about it. And I wanted to see how they reacted when people brought things up that they weren't too sure about or they felt a little nervous about. All of that stuff, watching that, again, physicality and human exchange, allowed me to do work at a bigger level, which was connecting with multiple humans and communicating in a way that made sense for them. So it's about, again, starting with that little seed of very, very human connection. Like I said, we're all just on this weird floating rock, and what is good and what people gravitate towards is something authentic and meaningful. So finding that and then figuring out how to make that applicable for all. It's not easy, but it is fun. So yeah, experiment with AI, but just start from a place of like really tiny details and then use AI to sort of help you blow out those details. That's at least the approach that we've been taking, and it is working quite well. But yeah, as someone who lives and breathes for words and books and gets a tremendous amount of joy from writing copy, I know that it is really annoying to my coworkers and my clients, and probably kind of to you when I just say you need to write better copy. But sadly, that's kind of like the biggest takeaway and the biggest piece of advice. I do feel like as e-commerce businesses have really taken over and the cultural and media landscape has shifted so drastically to sort of meet them, a lot of the magic of good copywriting has been lost along the way. But what I have seen time and time again is that when you insert that magic of having really, really good copy, you almost consistently see the performance directly correlate. It's just a great way to differentiate yourself as a brand, and it's a great way to really dig into like, who are we, what is the tone, how do we speak as a brand is so interesting. I'll probably like do a lot of follow-up episodes about copy, but it's so important to really nail that tone as a brand and consistently show up with those same words. And I don't want to get like too overly technical. Well, I didn't want to get too overly technical in this episode because I will in later episodes about how to write good copy from like a very technical point of view. But I think this is a good place to start, especially going into Father's Day, when good copy is a great way to build a brand for Father's Day. And I don't mean build a brand in a like start a brand, you have a really easy giftable tie business. I mean like Father's Day, especially on organic socials, is a great opportunity to ham it up with copy and to really get some eyeballs on your business and start building brand affinity, even if you aren't the most giftable Father's Day product at this point in time. Something that I tell people all the time is that a brand is not a person and you shouldn't act like it is. But you are a person behind the brand. And I think it's the reason that, you know, we're seeing employee-led content scale on multiple platforms right now. People yearn for that connection. We're all, myself included, on our phones way too much. And so to see something so uniquely human in the way that it stanks, to use the wording from earlier. It's an art form that people still gravitate towards in like any way that you do it. So not giving yourself the opportunity to do that through copy, I think, is leaving money on the table. I don't think I said leaving money on the table until right now, so glad that I snuck that into the episode. But yeah, Father's Day, like I said, a perfect opportunity to really dig into what you're doing on the copy side and start experimenting and having a little bit of fun. When we look at Mr. Abbott's life and then we look back at that Chivas Regal ad, there is such an obvious connection between the ad that I read you at the beginning of this episode and the man that I'm very grateful to have gotten to share some of his life and his story with you guys. There's such a clear path, right, towards what I told you about him as a person and the copy that he produced for that brand. I think that sometimes we struggle on the creative side of advertising with feeling like when we infuse our work with too much genuine emotion, that somehow we're cheapening that emotion for ourselves by deploying it for capital gain. And I get that, especially when you say it like that, it does sound really scary and terrible. But when you think of really big artists in different capacities, that's sort of exactly what they're doing. Like if you think about who is big right now. If we think about like a Taylor Swift, who's really at the top of her own art form, she constantly leverages her own emotions into her art that she then makes money off of. So I'd like encourage you to think about your own work as an advertiser in that same way and to not be scared of putting more of yourself into it and more genuine, authentic, emotional language, because it does work really, really, really well. And that is the end of the episode, folks. I'll stop ranting, go to a local bookstore, write better copy. That's kind of the thesis for today. And make sure that you're utilizing Father's Day to build a bit of brand affinity, to do something maybe different. I'm not saying to run as much copy as the Chivas Regal ad, but I am saying to think differently about it. You've got an opportunity to tell some funny, cheesy jokes and to really have fun as a brand. So definitely take advantage of that. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. And I will see you guys next week. Thanks for listening.